So, welcome to Romera Records virtual cast. Today we have on Joel. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, yeah, just got you in from Pod Match, just like a lot of other people. So, I guess let's go ahead and dive into who you are, what you do, and like how you got started.
Sure. Um, yeah, so I refer to myself sort of as like a polymath kind of. For work, I'm a production manager for a manufacturing facility makes parts for the electrical grid. I'm a PhD student in psychology. I'm a podcaster as well. I've got a philosophy podcast from Nowhere to Nothing. I am a musician, so I play seven different instruments and I record my own music and release it online. I'm an author. I just finished writing my first novel, so that's in editing. That'll probably be released this year. And I paint, I 3D print, and a bunch of other stuff on top of it. But that's kind of the basics.
You must have a time machine somewhere because that's crazy. Yeah, I do a lot of stuff too. So I love having people on my podcast who do these different things because it's so many things to talk about because I respect people who do a lot of different things because I know how hard it can be to manage your time and to get all those things done. Okay, so let's see. Let's do the music first because I also do music. Seven different instruments. What you got?
So the main three are bass, drums, and guitar. And then behind me, you can see I got to figure out which way to lean. I got a mandolin, a dulcimer, and a ukulele, and then I play some keyboard.
Okay. I remember when I was in high school, this girl told me that she played a mandolin. And I was like, what the heck is a mandolin? Then she pulls it out of her trunk, and I was like, "Oh, it kind of looks like a guitar." But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, a little bit.
it's a very it's a very unique, I would say, instrument because most people aren't very accustomed to it, and I don't think if most people heard it, they would be like, "Oh yeah, that's a mandolin." So do you know any kind of like history behind it or anything like that?
Not really. My best guess is it probably evolved out of a middle-age instrument similar to a lute or something like that. But yeah, you have four sets of strings. So, each string is doubled with a harmonic. And yeah, it's a little bit difficult to play. Strings are close together, the frets are small. Um, but it's kind of neat because it's mostly associated with country music, and I don't play country.
Hmm,
Um, but you can tune it in ways to make it sound sort of Eastern, kind of like Indian or something.
okay.
So I like using it for some of the weirder sounds that way. But yeah, it's a fun one.
So do you play it and then like um alter it with like plugins or something like that in your music creation?
Yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of it does plug in, so I could use like an amp sim or something and add some effects to it. I
Mm,
haven't messed around with that. And I think I might in the future because it's a neat idea. I've done it with ukulele before. I've done like a distorted uke, and
mm.
that's kind of neat. But no, I haven't tried it on mandolin yet.
Yeah, I think this girl that I've been making music with, I think she has a ukulele. I can't remember what she has, but she came over and we just recorded it on a microphone and she was like, "God, I hate the way that sounds." And but she's one of those people that like she's good at stuff but hates everything that she does. I'm just like, "It sounds great to me." But I just put I don't know if you know what guitar rig is. It's made by Native Instruments, but I put it through that and started adding some like effects, like some amps and stuff to it. She's like, "That sounds crazy." I was like, "Yeah, you gotta wait. You gotta let the picture develop."
Yeah. Yeah, I almost always I double track everything. So I like plugging it in and then I like micing it as well and kind of mixing the sounds, even if I don't use any effects or anything. I just find even with like acoustic guitar or something, plugged in, you got a real kind of piezo-y, nasally sound that sort of sucks. But through a mic, sometimes it can get a little bit darker, woolly, or you're kind of at the mercy of the room. Right now I'm upgrading all the insulation, all my audio, acoustic insulation in here. But yeah, so I like getting both sound sources and then doing some kind of blending them together to get a sound. But
So what's your style of music that you like to create?
It's kind of alternative psychedelic rock kind of stuff.
Hmm.
It's a bit all over the map. But that's probably the best term. I go back and forth. My most recent album is pretty poppy. But I've also done like a 15-minute space opera thing. So,
Hmm.
so it's kind of all over the map. But uh psychedelic alternative rock is probably a good term.
Okay, so you like to basically just be creative instead of doing something that's just like appeasing the masses, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm the world's worst marketer, so I don't actually advertise for anything or do any of that. I just do it for myself and then I release it. And if people like to listen to it, great. And if not, that's fine too. It's so easy and free now, a lot of places to release stuff that I just do it. And it's funny how it'll get around even if you don't say anything. To the point where like I'm an extreme introvert, right? So a lot of people laugh at that when they hear me on a podcast. They go, "Well, you're talking, as part one of your hobbies, but it's a little bit different." But in real life, like I'm an introvert, like I am not social at all, and so I more than once I've had people say, "Hey, let's start a band and play your music." I had a guy, I've got three guys we want to start touring with your music, and I go, no, because I don't like touring. I don't like going out and playing in front of people. I've done that and it's not my thing. I like sitting in the studio and recording. But yeah.
There's a guy that I know who he was talking about how a lot of people have the misconception of like what an introvert is, and he was saying that like introvert and extrovert, and he was saying that like most people think it's just like introvert, like you just stay indoors and you don't talk to people, and extrovert, you're just like always going out and having fun. But he was like, really, it's about how you deal with situations. It's like if something's happening to you, say somebody, dies in your family or something like that. An introvert is more likely to deal with that by themselves and not um, reach out to other people. And like an extrovert is going to be the one that posted on Facebook, letting everybody know what happened to them, and want everybody to come over and sob together, and I was like, oh man, like that's a good way of looking at it, and I think that you talking about not wanting to go on tour, shows that like yeah, like that's how I deal with my music. I don't need to tell everybody about my music and all this kind of stuff. Like I just like to make my music and I'm done with it.
Yeah, it's the same thing with a lot of stuff. Lots of people are like people try to push you to market stuff, like whether it's the podcast or the music or whatever. And what a lot of people don't realize is like being famous is my worst nightmare. Like there's nothing I would hate more than like walking down the street and being recognized by strangers. So it's like I'm good just doing stuff behind the microphone and letting it be what it is. But
Yeah, and sometimes, you just by being good at what you do, you stumble into it, as you said, like it's amazing how even if you don't talk about your music, people might end up finding it and liking it. So, sometimes you can't help where that fame comes from.
yeah, well, and like I live in a small town and the the mayor ended up finding my podcast somehow and listening to it. And now I'm on the village board of trustees. So now I'm in like a public like government position. I'm like, this is not what I was hoping was going to happen. But that's part of the beauty of life, right? I mean, is you just gotta go where it takes you. And even if you're doing something that you don't like initially, it's all part of growing and you can become somebody new and somebody better through some of those experiences. But
Where you located at?
I'm in like Western New York, sort of
Mm.
like between Buffalo and Rochester.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like so I'm in Memphis and it's like so I'm from Alabama. I'm from a small town in Alabama. It's called Aniana, and it's like 6,000 people was the population when I was growing up. And like here in Memphis, like the area, not just like city of Memphis limits or whatever, but like the area has like a million people. And it's still, I guess it's maybe just because I've honed into the music scene, but it still seems like a small town because I meet so many people, who all do music, and they're like, "Oh, I know that person." Like, "Oh yeah, I know that person." And I'm just like, "Man, that's crazy." It's like I am stuck saying the phrase "small world" like so many times because things just happen. Like okay, so you heard of 3 6 Mafia?
Yeah.
So um somebody that used to be in that group was a rapper named Lord Infamous, and it was DJ Paul from 3 6 Mafia. It was his brother. It's like his half brother. Well, he started another group with a guy, and or like a record label with a guy, and that guy's name is Two Tone. Well, I'd like vaguely heard of Two Tone and Lord Infamous, but one of my business partner, he was like mixing some music or whatever. He's like, "Yeah, I got to mix this music for Two Tone." I was like, "Wait a minute, the Two Tone?" And he was like, "Yeah, I guess." And I was like, "Dude, that's crazy." I was like, "That's so wild." And he mixes like all of his music now. And dang, where was I going? Oh yeah, and then when I one day at work, I have a full time job, so I go to work, and one of my coworkers was telling me about some guy that's about to start working there, who he knows, who makes music with like Two Tone and all these other people who were like close with 3 6 Mafia. I was like, really? Because like one of my business partners like mixes all the Two Tone stuff, so I go to talk to him, and I was like, "Have you ever heard of like Ryan Olson or Uproar Recording?" And he was like, "Yeah, I think the name sounds familiar." I was like, "Well, he says he mixes all the two-tone stuff." And he was like, "Oh man, ask him if he knows Mr. 420." I was like, "All right." So I asked Ryan, I was like, "Have you ever heard of Mr. 420?" He's like, "Yeah, I mix all of his stuff with two-tone." And I was like, "Dude, I work with this guy." And he was like, "No way." So I was like, dude, small world, just and that's something I've noticed about if you just keep doing things like you're in podcasting, and music and all these other career fields. If you just keep doing things, the world just starts getting smaller and smaller. Like people just know each other. It's pretty interesting thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And I you can sort of see that like if you look up any famous person's like Wikipedia page, right? And go to like the early life section, you'll just see like it seems really coincidental, but like they know all of these other famous people, right? And I think that that is just because at some point, it doesn't matter what career field it is, at some point, um, it gets niche enough, small enough where these you come into contact with these people. So yeah, it is interesting how that always works out.
So you said you also do well, it was like a psychology or what?
Yeah, yeah, working on a PhD.
Okay. So what's the purpose of that? What was your plan on getting this psychology degree?
So that is just for fun. Um, I was in the army for 6 years, so I got some school benefits. And so since it's cheap, I just keep going. So I've got degrees in criminal justice, interdisciplinary studies, education. And so now I'm working on psychology.
So I would think you could do maybe like CIA or something like that FBI with criminal justice and psychology because that's the kind of people that they need is people who are um well versed in human interactions, human our expressions, stuff like that, the way people think. That's really the kind of stuff that they look for.
Yeah. Yeah. The FBI did reach out to me at one point, and honestly, I looked at the job offer and I was like, I get paid more money now to just work Monday through Friday because their schedules are like you can imagine. Like if you're watching TV shows, right? You see these guys, if there's a crime, they're on it. They're on stakeouts at nighttime, they're working during the day. On the weekend, somebody gets shot, they're coming into work. Well, that's kind of real life. So they expect you to be doing all this stuff and like flying across the country, for $80,000 a year starting out. I go, nah, nah, I'm good.
Yeah, and it's important for people to understand, like, what a job might entail. Like, a lot of people would just think, "Oh, yeah, that sounds cool, I'll do that." Then it's like, you don't realize what else you have to do. Because I had that realization. I was in the Air Force, and when I got out, um, I was thinking about becoming a cop. And so I went and did like the physical test. I passed the physical test, then I had passed like a written test, did that. And then they were going to the interviews. And like I ended up pursuing something else, but it was mainly because I started thinking about like all the other things that cops have to do. Like just like being a traffic cop, just having to freaking direct traffic, and it doesn't matter if it's sunny outside or if it's pouring rain or if it's snowing, like somebody's got to direct that traffic. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's just a task that I don't want to have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. The army was definitely that reality check for me. Because again, in the army, everybody is infantry, right? Everybody learns to shoot, everybody does everything. So and then you got training exercises and stuff, and it's like, okay, man, I'm sleeping in the woods for 2 weeks, without a tent, without a sleeping bag, like in all kinds of weather. And you go, this, well, it sucks, right? And so I think that's the thing is a lot of jobs that people think of as being like real prestigious and stuff. I think it's because of, the importance of them. But when you think about the work-life balance or any of that other stuff, people tend to not really take that into account. So at this point in my life, I've got so many sources of meaning from hobbies and other things that I do where it's like my job, I I make some money there and I enjoy it. So I'm not super interested in pursuing anything else unless it meets those criteria and then adds some value to it as well. And yeah, I didn't see traveling all over the country and working nights and weekends and all this kind of stuff for less money being a really great career path, despite the important work and the potentially cool stuff you could do. But
What you said, actually, I'd never even thought about before. It's like the more important a job is, the more like it there are some aspects of it that just absolutely suck. And that that's something that's pretty crazy to think about, because we think about people who do really important things. It's like, oh, they must live the good life. That they don't
mm,
have to worry about anything. But it's like, no, their job is very important. And so there's some sucky things that they have to go through. Like I used to want to be an astronaut. Like I was bet for sure that that's what I was going to do. I wanted to get like an aerospace engineering degree, all this kind of stuff. And well, then I started thinking about being an astronaut. I
yeah,
was like, "Oh yeah, you're in space. Um, not that many people in space. You can't just do whatever you want to do. That's a job. Like you're up there to complete task, to complete missions. Not really in control of who you talk to. Um, very little resources up there. It could be annoying and zero gravity all the time. Like these are so many factors that I didn't really think about. I was just like, "Oh, that's awesome, being in space and doing all these cool things, like, that's what I wanted to do," and then I thought about it, and I was like, "Oh, man, that's gotta suck." I
yeah, yeah. It's
don't
got to
wanna
be real hard. You have to have the physical fitness component. You have to be one of the smartest people on the planet. You got to be good at everything because, like you said, there's only a few people up there. So if anything breaks, anything goes wrong, you have to know how to fix all of it. And yeah, everything you mentioned. But then even other jobs, jobs that people idolize, right? I'm sick of hearing about it at this point, but I think it's a good example. Taylor Swift, right? Um, well, she thinks that we're sick of hearing about her. I'm sure that she's sick of hearing about it, right? And that's exactly like the point I was making earlier. Is like, could you imagine not being able to go anywhere without like wondering if a camera is going to catch you picking your nose or wondering, like you can't do anything without everybody knowing about it. That's my idea of a living hell. Like I can't think of anything worse than always being watched essentially. And and once you've achieved that level of fame, there's so many people looking at you that there's always constantly going to be negative feedback or criticism involved as well. And so it's like you either have to completely shut everything off, or, I don't know. I don't know how people do it. And yeah, it's just any job you can think of. Like you said, any job you can think of. Um, doesn't matter how easy or prestigious it seems, there is a trade-off. There's always a trade-off. But
Yeah, and just being on that topic of like the Taylor Swift thing, like people who are super famous, they're like held to like a higher standard. And you were just saying like, picking your nose. Like most people do that. And it's like if somebody who is ultra famous does it, somebody's going to find a way
Hmm.
to pick at whatever that person's doing. It's like, oh my gosh, they use Old Spice deodorant. Like we found 13 studies that says Old Spice gives you cancer. And it's like, come on, y'all. Like y'all are just finding a way to make
Yeah.
everything that that person does, no matter what it is, seem like it's a negative thing, which we all know news is geared toward negativity because it triggers
Mm.
people. But
Right.
it's something that, as you said, it's something that people think like it sounds like a good idea, but in reality, when you have to actually go through it, you're like, this is not what is cracked up to be.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I mean, that's sort of like philosophy in a nutshell. It's just taking all of the stuff that you take for granted, and then sort of digging below the surface and kind of critically examining things, and realizing that they're a lot different than what your initial impressions of them are. So that's uh that's what my podcast is about, essentially, is like taking one word, and then me and my co-host will talk about it for an hour, looking at, historically what people have said about it, and then thinking about it for ourselves, and debating some things, and then asking some speculative questions. That's what you find out, is like even the simplest things in life, you look at them and you go, man, this is a lot more complex than I thought it was.
Who's your co-host?
So he was my philosophy professor from community college way back in the day.
Oh wow. By the way, sorry, how old are you?
Oh, I'm 35.
Okay, you look great. By the way, I was
Oh, thanks.
you're one of those people that like I don't know if you're 21 or 41. Like I,
Yeah, it depends on the context, kind of, right? Because when I got out of the army just a couple of years ago, and so like when you have the same haircut as everybody else and you're wearing the same thing and everybody's in shape, they think that you're 18, right? So I had to
yeah.
go like renew my Humvee license, and the kid was like, "What's your date of birth?" I'm like, 88. He goes, "Do you say 88 or 98?" I said 88. He goes, "Man, you're old." Yeah, yeah, I know. But then, I go to work, so if I'm wearing like a button-up shirt and a tie and stuff, yeah, people think you're 40 or whatever. But yeah,
Oh,
it's context based, I think.
okay. But also I asked that because by the way, I'm 31, but you just all the things that you said that you've done, I know that it takes a while to do some of those things. So you had to have been a certain age to be able to accomplish all that. And to be able to do that, at 35, I was on a podcast with a guy who I was telling him all the things that I had done. I think I was 30 or 29 at the time, and he was 38, and he was telling me he was jealous of me for how much I'd accomplished in my lifetime. And I was like, dude, I just keep doing things. Like I just don't stop because I know if I stop, then I'll get complacent and stagnant. And I see other people who have done that. I see my parents. My mom was huge into my life, like her kids' life. I've got two sisters, and she wanted to do everything for us. She didn't really do anything for herself. And so now that like we're grown and out of the house, it's like she has nothing, to accomplish, nothing to do. And I definitely don't want to be in that situation. I have a wife, but no kids. And I know that at the end of the day, I have stuff to do and that there's stuff that I want to do. So I always preach to people, get into as much stuff as possible because you never know what's the one thing you want to stick with. And if that one thing gets taken from you, you can just jump to the next thing. Like if you were big into playing guitar and you lost your hands, like you might want to be able to have something else to fall back on that's going to preoccupy your mind. So you never know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm 100% on board with that. What I always tell people is I'm always trying to be a beginner at something for a
Mm,
couple reasons, right? Because I think that being new at something, that's what keeps you young, right? Is learning new stuff. And we know that on a physiological level from psychology, but we also know it anecdotally, right? Like you just know when you're learning something new, you feel good. But also like it keeps you humble, right? Because you do a lot of stuff and people um, want to tell you how great it all is and stuff. And especially if you only know one thing, right? If you're really great at one thing and people are like, "Oh, you're so great" and stuff, it's easy to fall into the trap of saying like, "Yeah, you know what? I am great."
mm.
Because you don't know all of the stuff that you don't know. But if you're constantly doing new stuff and people are like, "Oh, wow, you're really great." You go, "Well, you didn't see me just break my 3D printer 4 times and swear for 5 straight minutes." So like I know that I'm just a dude, that's just trying to figure stuff out. But yeah, you're just taking that next step and putting yourself out there. Um, because that's like like I said earlier, that's you have to enjoy the journey of life and trying to see as much of it as you can, I think is a big part of it.
So for people who aren't doing all the things that you're doing, what's some advice, I guess, on the length of time that you like to spend on things? Because most people, I think they fail because they give up. A quitter is a failure. Somebody who doesn't quit, I would not consider you a failure because you're still doing it. You're keeping at it. So what's some things that you would say as far as like, length of time where it's like, hey, just keep going at it because, some people might quit after, playing guitar for like 3 months and they're like, oh, I suck. I can't keep a hold of this. Like, how long did it take you to um just want to just get over that hump of, "Oh, I should quit now," of all the things that you do.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a great quote that was right along the lines of what you were saying that says, "You haven't failed until you've stopped failing."
Mm,
Right? As long as you're failing, like you said, you're trying. And if you're trying, there's a very good chance you're going to get better because humans are learning machines. That's what we do, right? So if you stick with something long enough, you'll get it. Um, but yeah, it varies from hobby to hobby, right? What I tell people when I'm teaching them guitar is, if you can make it through the first 2 months, you'll play for the rest of your life. Those first 2 months are brutal, right? Because you got to get calluses on your fingertips, and you got to get muscle memory in for a strum pattern. But once you have those two things, you have them for life. It's like riding a bike, and you'll always do it. Other things, obviously take more time. A PhD, okay, well, that's 7 years, and the whole time you're reading these complex, dry stuff, and it's all building on itself until you do something with it, right? So it varies from hobby to hobby. It's not so much about the time frame as the process. Um, and yeah, that process is really just never thinking of failure as failure, right? Just thinking of as a learning opportunity so that you can keep going. And that's pretty much it. The other thing that I always encourage people to do is to get the basics right first. You can't build an empire without a foundation, right? So that was sort of the turning point for me was when I was young. I remember, just feeling like garbage and being depressed and all this stuff, and then looking at my lunch at work, and I had like two little Debbie snacks and like 2 bags of like chips, and being like, "What am I doing? Like, I'm a full grown man. Like, let's figure this out, right?" And so, yeah, so I mean, I sleep 8.5 hours a night, and I work out every day, and I eat good, and that sets you up to have the energy and to have you know you can't have a mind without a body, right? So you have to eat right, you have to work out in order to think right. And a lot of people sort of overlook that. You're always going to struggle if you're setting yourself back some.
I definitely think that is also attributed to, me being confused on how old you are because you're taking care of yourself, and I notice a lot of people who don't take care of themselves, um, their age can be telling as far as like looking too old for who they are. Me, Rachel, my wife, she was making a point to me that kids who are like overweight look way older than what they should be, and I was like, I never noticed that. And like we were looking at some kid that was overweight, and they looked like they could have been like 14, and they were like 10 or 9. And I was like, man, like just not taking care of yourself just ages you literally.
Yeah, I had a funny story about that recently where um I met this guy. Well, I hired him at my job, and I'm getting to know him. And he's overweight and he's bald and he's got these Coke bottle glasses and stuff. And him and I were talking about like the Renaissance Fair, and I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm like I haven't been there in a quarter century." And he laughs, and I go, "What's funny?" He goes, "Well, that's a funny way of saying you've never been there before." And I go, "No, I've been there." He goes, "Wait." He goes, "How old are you?" And I go, "Well, I'm 35." He goes, "Man," he's like, "I didn't know you were that old." Well, then we're talking a little bit later, and I find out this one lady's his grandma, and I go, "Hold on a minute." I go, "I remember you coming into McDonald's when I was 18 and serving you ice cream cones when you were in kindergarten, you know?" And I go, "Holy," like I was a full grown adult and I served him ice cream cones as a kid. And now I look at him and I go, "Man, you're looking a little rough." But
Uh,
yeah, yeah, that's the thing is I think, some of it's physical, right? If you're getting your sleep and you're eating right and working out, that's a component of it. But then the other part is mental, right? I think that you can have, everybody has events occur throughout life, and how we react to them is important. What's going to stress people out or cause them to be traumatic to them is going to vary from person to person. But if you can find ways to overcome those, and if you are always new at something, right, you're always excited about something, you're always learning something new. I think if you have those two components, the physical and the mental together, it is a good way of staying young, which isn't to say that like I'm chasing after youth. Like I'm just chasing after a good life, right? That's what I want. But
yeah, and I think that on top of that, just what you were just saying, like the whole stress thing, it's like people who are naturally just like happy all the time usually just look younger. Like I've noticed that people who just don't carry that much stress on them, they just naturally just have a youthfulness look to them. And I think it's genuinely their body isn't getting stressed out. Their body isn't bearing this weight on them. And it shows like people who find positive things to do, find positive thoughts in every situation. They end up just seeming like younger type people. And every time I meet somebody who's like in their 60s or 70s and they don't look that old, they're usually like a really positive person. They're always like doing stuff and they look really happy all the time. And I'm just like, man, I would have never guessed you were that old because of the energy that you have and the positivity that you carry because most people like nowadays when you get up in 60 and 70 like you some people are starting to develop issues and they're not carrying themselves the way that they were maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So it's very important to be aware of like your mood and your attitude because it could be aging you and you don't even realize it.
yeah, and that's something that like there's a lot of science to back it up now. Like even 10 or 15 years ago, there wasn't much, but there's been a lot of studies recently in the field of psychology that have looked at it. And yeah, they found that, your mood, right? You're releasing all of these neurotransmitters and hormones and stuff based off of your mood. And those affect your autonomic nervous system, and having a bunch of cortisol and a bunch of adrenaline coursing through you and stuff. You know, those are meant to be short-term um, neurotransmitters in order to help you surmount a temporary situation. And if you're constantly being just flooded with them, right? If your body's always in this fight or flight sort of mode, um, it's corrosive. You know, it starts to take a toll on you physically. Yeah, so yeah, there's science to back it up. And you know, having oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin in higher amounts, the good neurotransmitters, um, leads to more neuron growth in your brain. So it keeps your brain younger by replacing neurons, and yeah, it's just overall beneficial. So there's hard science to back up the fact that yeah, you lowering your stress level is one of the best things you can do for yourself.
All right, so we covered what the music, the psychology. Oh, what else do you do? Oh, podcasting. You said something else. I think you said a few other things.
Yeah, yeah. I just finished writing my first novel recently. Um, and yeah, yeah,
So, what's the
that's
novel about?
so yeah, what I did with that one is I was really into Campbell's s- hero's journey, right? Which is sort of this idea that there's an archetypical story that appeals to humans across time, right? Famously, like George Lucas was inspired by the same thing when he wrote Star Wars, and basically, if you analyze any story, you'll see like these same basic structures. So I was kind of fascinated by that topic, and I wanted to write a book. Um, and so I set out with the goal of trying to follow that structure, but at each step, seeing how far I could subvert the sort of archetype and keep the story working, right? And that's something that I mean, I try to do that in music too. I think that's what makes good art is you know, people sometimes talk about things being catchy or poppy in a disparaging way. But what it comes down to is people do want things to be catchy, but they also want them to be unpredictable.
Mm,
And that's why it's so hard to make good art is because those two things very often are contradictory, right? So if you're too catchy, then your stuff is boring. But if you're not catchy enough, you just go, what's going on here, right? So um, with music, I'm always trying to find that line. Like, how can I make this catchy, but how can I also make people want to hear more of it? So I was trying to do the same thing with the book, right? Okay, I know that this formula for a story works, um, but I don't want people to see what's coming from the beginning of the book. As a matter of fact, I want them to get all the way up to the last page and think they know what's going to happen and not know, right? So, and I'm pretty happy with it. I think that it did come out well. Um, so yeah, like I said, I'm in the process of tearing down all this cheap audio installation and putting up some new stuff, and I'm going to record an audiobook version over the summer and get it released. And yeah, pretty excited about it.
that sounds awesome, and I definitely think that's 100% true when it comes to what people really want. And have you ever watched Adventure Time, the cartoon?
Yeah.
Dude, that is the epitome of catchy but unpredictable. Like one of my friends was telling me about this one episode, and spoiler alert, but there's an episode where there's a character called Tree Trunks, and Tree Trunks looks like a little elephant, I believe. And she was, I think she was needing certain apples to make an apple pie. And Finn and Jake, you know, their whole thing, the show's called Adventure Time. For people who don't know what this is, the whole show, Finn and Jake go on adventures. So they take upon themselves to go on this adventure to help Tree Trunks find this apple that, or these type of apples that they need to make apple pie. It's a certain fantastic apple pie that she always makes. Well, they go through all this stuff. Like it's ridiculous every single episode, but they ended up helping Tree Trunks find this apple. And they have to like hold her up and help her get to the apple. They're like, go ahead, Tree Trunks, try it. Let us know how it is. And like Tree Trunks gets the apple, eats it, and then explodes. And that's the end of the episode. I was I was dying laughing. I was like, dude, that's so crazy because like you you get the satisfaction that Tree Trunks ate the apple and she was able to try it, she got it. And then she literally just explodes, and that's the end of the episode. Like it cuts to black and goes to the outro. And I was like, dude, that's so funny. But
That's
but
great.
great because it's like
Yeah.
it was it was typical Adventure Time. An adventure happened, resolution, they got the apple, and then unpredictable, somebody exploded.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good example of, being able to sort of follow the narrative trope, um, but make it so that you don't see what's coming. Yeah.
And I think whenever like music or anything does something like that, it's fantastic. Like especially in movies, when they have plot twist or whatever, that's really the whole point of the word plot twist is you have a plot and then boom, something happens. There's a twist to it. So it's following what it's supposed to. It's following the narrative, but then you have a change that creates the characters some kind of situation that they have to get themselves out of or what have you. And that's what keeps people interested. Like, I hate TV shows where like the same thing happens over and over again. And it's like, I know what's gonna happen. I don't have to watch the rest of this. But and I think shows even like I love Seinfeld. Seinfeld's like one of my favorite shows ever. And that show is literally about nothing, but it's everyday tasks that like the smallest thing could happen and that could take you on an adventure throughout your day. And that's the whole episodes is just everyday things that happen to people, but they're showing you how like this other thing could happen too. It is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like Seinfeld, the whole plot is basically a side quest. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing, it doesn't go anywhere. But that's a really good example, right? Is that plot twists are an integral part of the story. And that's true of artwork as well as life, right? It doesn't matter what your plans are for your art or for your life, something's going to happen that's just going to go turn things on a dime, right? And it's how you react to it that kind of determines the rest of the story. But yeah, if there's no plot twist, then it's just boring, right? If you, and again, whether it's art or life, and I think that um you were talking about it earlier, and I think that you see it a lot. A lot of people fall prey to either um making their life their work or making their life their kids, or really just making it about one thing that's outside of themselves. And I you hear a lot of older people when they get towards the end start saying, like, man, I wish I'd done things differently. Because time is the one resource that you you can't get back, right? So you got to use it as wisely as you can.
Absolutely. And, I think I'm probably going to say that when I get older. And I'm only 31 and I'm still thinking about all the things that I wish I did when I was younger and all the things that, I hope I can do in the future. But, I'm just making the most out of it. And I'm just like you. Like I'm living 1,000 lives at the same time right now. But there's still so much out there. And I think if you're a type of person who doesn't really think about those things, and you might get complacent. If you're like from a really small town and everybody lives very rural, and you don't, have a lot going, then you might be happy with just, being at home or whatever. But man, I like doing stuff. I like getting out there and adventuring and finding what's out there in the world and just doing whatever I can.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part, right? Is that the other thing that you'll hear people say is the opposite of that, right? Like, I've got no regrets, right? I think if you have no regrets, then you haven't really examined your life,
Yeah.
right? Like I've got regrets, right? Like you were just saying, like despite the amazing life if I were to die right now, I'd be happy. Like I've lived a great life. It seems like I've been alive a really, really long time, right? So I'm happy with it. But at the same time, you look back, I do things different. I think that that's natural, right? And that happens with art too. You mentioned your friend at the beginning of the episode, how she's really good, but nothing's ever good enough, right? That is the most common trap for artists, especially musicians, right? I know a lot of musicians that I grew up playing with them, and they're better than I am, but they've never released anything because they wrote one song and they've been tweaking it for 20 years. And you go, you got to realize this thing's never going to be good enough. Like it's never going to be perfect. And I've never subscribed to that, right? I always, the way I think of it is like, man, the music that I'm making is just a snapshot of my life, right? So I just bang it out. 2 weeks from beginning to end, I'll write, record, and release an album. And do I look back on it and go, man, there's something I wish I'd done different? Sure, but I would have done that if I had spent 20 years tweaking it. I have no doubt, right? So you just release it. And then when you look at those things that seem like flaws 2 or 3 weeks after you released it, 2 or 3 or 10 years after you released it, it's actually the thing that sort of endears it to you. You go, it takes you back to that point in time, and you go, oh yeah, yeah, that's when I didn't know how to use an equalizer, right? And you go, there's something kind of charming about it, right? That's that's what life is. It's not never making mistakes, and it's not regretting mistakes. But it's realizing that they're going to happen, and accepting them and learning from them, and then moving on, not dwelling on it.
What is something that you would say most people are, um I would say, like, troubled by when it comes to that whole situation of, like, just, oh, I just got to do this one thing to tweak it, and then it's right, and then 20 years later they still haven't finished it. Like, what do you think that is, like, that people have? Is it because you could say it's them being perfectionists, right? But everybody knows nobody's perfect, so it's kind of a cop out excuse to say, "Oh, I'm a perfectionist. That's why I haven't finished it." Like, what
Yeah, and I think being, saying you're a perfectionist is kind of arrogant too, because that sort of implies that you can achieve perfection in
uh,
some way. And I
that
think that most people don't believe that, right? I think that it's fear.
mm,
Um, Whether it's fear of what people will say about it, or fear of you yourself regretting not doing something different later. I think that it's fear, which is natural, right? Like we talked about, that's why it's good to be a beginner, is because fear and failure are always right there. And so you become best friends with them, right? Anytime you do something new, and there's a chance that somebody else is going to see it, or somebody else is going to experience it, you're afraid, right? And you I think that you start putting stuff out there, and once you become familiar with it, then it doesn't really hold much sway over you anymore. But as in most things, taking the first steps are always the hardest ones. And so, yeah, it's just getting through that first part. And once you get through that first part and you realize how fun something is, and then you hang on to it the rest of your life. But it's really hard to get to that point.
yeah, for sure, and I'm really glad you said that. I really like what you said about the perfectionist thing is just arrogant because we know you can't be perfect. So for you to say, "Well, I'm a perfectionist, so that's why I'm taking so long," it's like, that's not a real thing. So don't say that. Uh, I do think that, yeah, it's the fear, yeah, for sure, because some people, they're afraid of what people might think. They're afraid of what people might say about what they did. So they are trying to fix those errors before they even get them. It's like they're critiquing something that hasn't even been critiqued. Like they're trying to fix something that hasn't even been said as a problem. And once you get over that hump, as you said about like always being a beginner, you don't care about the failure or the fears of what people are going to say because you're used to it. You're used to, you beat yourself up enough to just be like, oh yeah, yeah, this is gonna suck. Like, yeah, this is gonna be bad. The podcast that I did before this, the guy he shoots videos and he helps um medical people deal with their videos, marketing and content. And he was like, now if you're going to start out, your first 10 videos are going to suck. I'm going to tell you that right now. And I love that because some people will try so hard to make their first video, their second, their third so great, and this guy who does this for a living is letting you know your first 10 are going to suck. And it's going to take years before you're great. And it's like some people just need to hear that. Some people need to hear professionals tell them no matter how hard you work, you're going to suck for a while. And then you're going to eventually get better. You just need to put in the time and effort. And when people hear that, it helps them. I tell experts all the time who come on my podcast. Like, tell me, tell me a story where you struggled. Tell me a story where you almost gave up, because that's what people can relate to. Like that story of anguish and all kinds of sorrow that you experience, if they can relate to that, then they can see themselves in you and they're going to respect you more and trust what you're saying, because it's hard to trust somebody when they're like, yeah, I did this. I started this company, made millions of dollars, sold it, started this other company. And it's like, yeah, tell me a story where you started a company that failed. Like, because
Yeah.
it's really hard to trust you right now.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that there's a couple things there, right? One is that like we were talking about, the more things you do, the more comfortable you get with fear and failure and actually reframing your relationship with them. So all of a sudden that if somebody you don't worry about if people thinks it sucks because like you said, yeah, I know, right? Like I'm not out here thinking that I'm the greatest thing on earth. Like I fail all the time. That's what I do. Like I'm an expert at it, right? But with being an expert failure, right, you become an expert learner. And there's a lot of crossover with that stuff. So even if you're learning a task or a skill that isn't like anything that you know before, you understand the process of trying, failing, having fear, troubleshooting, critical thinking, right? And then what you see happen, and this has happened to me a lot, later on in life, is I'll do something and somebody will be, wow, have you done this before? I go, no, this is my first time. And they go, that's incredible. Like how that's there's no way. You're just naturally good at stuff. And I go, no, I'm not naturally good at stuff. Like what it is it's developing the skills of a learner, which we don't think of that as being a separate skill set, but it really is. And having the skill set of a learner allows you to master the basics of concepts much quicker than for an average person, right? I'm not great at anything, but I'm proficient at a bunch of stuff and I can get there pretty quick now because I know the process.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I do want to get into what are you working on? Like what are you ideas that you have for your future? You know, being 35, you've got two more lifetimes ahead of you. What do you plan on doing?
Yeah, so you know, of course the thing that's always on the front burner right now is the PhD. So this time of year, it's all consuming, right? During the school year, that's basically what I do. Um, I'm on spring break right now, and so again, it's only 1 week, right? But a lot of people look at that and say, well, what can you accomplish in 1 week, right? No, I'm booking myself solid with podcasts. I'm redoing my studio. I'm working on a bunch of different things. So time management, right? Just trying to fit everything in as best you can. But yeah, in the summer, that's going to be the big one is recording the audiobook version of my current book and getting that published. Um, I go usually in a cycle. One summer I'll release an album. The next summer I'll just release a single and work on something else. So I released an album last summer, so I'll do a single this year and work on my book, work on that sort of stuff. As far as future hobbies, um, I've got some things. I am also a big fan of astronomy, so I've got an 8-inch Dobsonian telescope, and so astrophotography is something that I'm getting pretty interested in.
Hmm.
I also used to do a lot of rock climbing when I was younger, so I'm thinking about getting back into some of that. Um, but really, it's kind of like we were saying at the beginning. Many times, in my new hobby is sort of determined by life's plot twist, right? I'm not actively going and pursuing something. I'm sort of letting things come to me and going, this seems like something that's interesting, right? This is something that I want to do, and I've just tried to design my life in such a way that, like we were saying earlier, is low stress and high interest, right? High stimulation with doing stuff that I like to do. So it's hard to say, and that's the good part, right? Is that it's not all planned out. There's always gonna be something new, and I don't know what it is right now, but I'm excited for it.
Awesome. Well, about time to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming on and spreading all the knowledge and wisdom that you have about all the many of things that you do. If you could just go ahead and give everybody like your contact info, how they can reach out to you and find this novel in the future, all the good stuff.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, I'm the world's worst marketer. Social media is not really my thing, but the podcast is called From Nowhere to Nothing. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to listen to my music, it's just Joel Bouchard. It's under my name, so you'll see it in the podcast notes here. And if you Google it, you'll be able to find it on anywhere you find MP3s. The book, which should be coming out, that's going to be down the road, but 3 to 6 months, something like that. It's called The Sleeper, The Scholar, and The Strix. So that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on, and it was great talking to you for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you for everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.